A vet risks everything to help a hurt bear cub. Years later, she encounters them again and is stunned. The morning sun lit Maple Creek's dense canopy as Dr. Sarah Thompson stood on her clinic's porch, coffee in hand. The hum of nature steadied her, a rare moment of calm. Her clinic, nestled on the outskirts of town, was more than just a place for treating animals, it was a labor of love. Built in the 1980s by her late father and mother, it had served the community for decades. Maple Creek Veterinary Clinic was etched in weathered wood above the front door, a symbol of trust for townsfolk who brought their pets, livestock, and sometimes even wild animals for care. It wasn't just a job, it was a legacy she had vowed to uphold. At 35, Sarah carried a quiet confidence despite her struggles. Her green eyes, once bright with ambition, now bore shadows of fatigue. The town saw her as the capable, compassionate doctor who always seemed to have the right answers, but beneath the surface, Sarah often felt like she was barely holding it all together. She'd grown up in Maple Creek, the daughter of a kind but demanding father who had dedicated his life to the clinic. After earning her veterinary degree at Cornell University, she had worked in bustling city animal hospitals, far removed from the tranquil forests of her childhood. But life had a way of pulling her back. Her father's sudden passing 3 years ago had left her little choice but to return. Since then, she had thrown herself into the clinic, treating everything from cats with fractured paws to moose calves rescued from highway accidents. Sarah's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the peaks of the Cascade Mountains loomed in the distance. Her father had loved those mountains, taking her on hiking trips every summer when she was young. He would point out tracks in the dirt or scat on the trail, teaching her to identify animals by their signs. "Every creature leaves a story behind," he'd say, his voice tinged with wonder. "It's our job to listen." She used to love those words, used to feel connected to something larger than herself. But now, they haunted her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd failed him somehow. The clinic was still standing, yes, but the spark, the magic he'd infused into his work, felt dimmer under her care. Her patients were thriving, but Sarah felt like she was merely going through the motions, her own story tangled in doubts and exhaustion. The clang of the clinic's screen door startled her, pulling her back to the present. Emily, her assistant, stepped outside, a clipboard in one hand and a half-eaten granola bar in the other. At 22, Emily was full of energy and optimism that often left Sarah envious. Her blonde ponytail bounced as she approached, her freckled face scrunched in concentration. "We've got a busy morning," Emily said, handing over the clipboard. "Mrs. Callahan is bringing in her Labrador for a checkup, and Mr. Grady called about his alpaca, something about a limp. Oh, and a couple of tourists found an injured fox on the hiking trail. They're on their way now." Sarah sighed, flipping through the notes. "Of course. Can't have a quiet day in Maple Creek, can we?" Emily grinned. "Not with you around." The comment was meant as a compliment, but it only added to the weight on Sarah's shoulders. She set her coffee cup down and pulled on her coat. "Let's get started." The clinic was already bustling by the time Sarah stepped inside. Mrs. Callahan's Labrador, an aging, golden-furred sweetheart named Buddy, wagged his tail enthusiastically as Sarah examined him. "Still eating everything in sight?" Sarah asked with a small smile, running her hands along the dog's ribs. "Of course," Mrs. Callahan replied, chuckling. "Last week, he got into my garden and ate half the zucchini." Sarah gave Buddy a gentle pat. "He's in good shape, considering. Just keep an eye on his weight, he's not a pup anymore." Moments like these were the easy ones, the ones that reminded Sarah why she loved her work. But as the morning wore on, the cases grew more challenging. Mr. Grady's alpaca needed X-rays, and the injured fox brought in by the tourists required stitches and careful sedation. By lunchtime, Sarah felt the familiar ache settling in her shoulders. Despite the steady flow of patients, the clinic often felt too quiet. The small-town warmth that Sarah had once cherished now felt stifling. Everyone knew her, but few truly knew her. Conversations rarely moved beyond polite pleasantries. Even Emily, for all her cheerfulness, didn't fully understand the pressure Sarah felt to carry on her father's legacy. As Sarah cleaned up after the fox's procedure, she caught her reflection in the stainless steel countertop. The woman staring back at her looked tired. She touched the edge of her stethoscope, remembering her father's hands guiding hers the first time she'd held one. "You can't save them all," he'd said gently after a particularly tough case. "But you can always try." Sarah closed her eyes, drawing in a deep breath. She was trying. Every day, she was trying. The afternoon passed in a blur of appointments, each one blurring into the next. As the sun began to dip below the treetops, Sarah finally found a moment to sit. She sipped lukewarm tea at her desk, her eyes scanning the clinic's logbook. The day had been long but uneventful until Emily burst through the door. "Sarah, you need to see this." Emily's voice was tight with urgency. Sarah's heart skipped. She stood quickly, following Emily outside. There, at the edge of the parking lot, stood something that made her breath catch, a massive grizzly bear, its fur matted and streaked with blood. Beside it, a smaller bear cub lay motionless, its tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The mother bear's eyes locked onto Sarah's, a mix of desperation and determination that cut through her like a blade. It wasn't a wild animal's stare. It was a plea. Sarah froze as the massive grizzly bear approached, its fur streaked with blood. The mother's golden eyes, protective yet exhausted, locked onto hers. Emily stood frozen a few feet behind Sarah, her hand gripping the edge of the clinic's doorframe. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What do we do?" Sarah couldn't answer. Her mind raced. The bear wasn't charging. Wasn't growling. She wasn't acting like a typical wild animal. Instead, she stood there as though she had brought her cub here on purpose. The thought sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Sarah took a tentative step forward, her hands raised in a gesture of calm. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice steady despite the thunderous pounding of her heart. "I'm not going to hurt you." The bear didn't move, but her eyes flicked to Sarah, then back to her cub. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough for Sarah to understand. The mother wasn't here for herself. She was here for her cub. Emily's voice broke through Sarah's focus. "Sarah, you can't be serious, that's a bear." "What if she—" "She's not going to hurt us," Sarah interrupted, though she wasn't entirely sure of that herself. "Look at her, Emily. She's here because she needs help." Emily's eyes darted nervously between the bear and Sarah. "But what if she changes her mind? What if she thinks we're a threat?" "She's trusting us right now," Sarah said, her voice firmer. "If we do nothing, that cub will die. I can't let that happen." Moving slowly, Sarah crouched a few feet away from the cub, close enough to assess its condition but far enough to retreat if the mother grew agitated. The cub's breathing was shallow, its tiny sides barely moving. Fresh claw marks marred its flank, likely from a fight with another animal, and there was a jagged wound on its hind leg. Blood seeped sluggishly from the gash, pooling in the dirt beneath it. Sarah's throat tightened. The injuries were bad, too bad for the cub to survive without immediate treatment. She turned her gaze back to the mother bear, who stood like a statue, her body taut with tension but her eyes watchful. "I need to move it," Sarah murmured, her voice directed at the bear as much as at Emily. "But if she sees me touch the cub, she might attack," Emily finished, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded. "We have to sedate her." Emily's eyes widened. "Are you out of your mind? You want to knock out a grizzly?" "It's the only way," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, but inside, fear coiled like a serpent. "If she stays awake, she'll never let us near the cub." Inside the clinic, Sarah retrieved the tranquilizer gun her father had kept for emergencies. It was a relic from his time assisting wildlife conservationists, a tool she had never imagined she'd need. Her hands trembled slightly as she loaded the dart, calculating the dose carefully. Too little and the bear wouldn't go down, too much and it could harm her. When she stepped back outside, the bear was still there, her golden eyes locked on the cub. Sarah took a deep breath and raised the gun. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I need you to trust me." The dart flew, striking the bear's shoulder. She let out a deep, rumbling growl, her massive body tensing. For a terrifying moment, Sarah thought she might charge, but then the sedative began to take effect, her movements slowing as her legs wavered beneath her. With a heavy thud, she sank to the ground, her head resting near her cub. Sarah didn't wait. She rushed forward, kneeling beside the cub and carefully lifting its limp body into her arms. The bear's fur was softer than she'd expected, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill of the air. She could feel the cub's faint heartbeat against her fingers, a fragile rhythm that spurred her into motion. "Emily, get the exam room ready," Sarah called as she hurried inside. Under the clinic's lights, Sarah cleaned the cub's wounds, its faint whimpers spurring her focus. As Emily handed her gauze, Sarah murmured, her voice soothing, "Sure. You're going to be okay, I promise." But the truth was, she wasn't sure. The cub's injuries were extensive, and its body was small, its reserves of strength nearly depleted. Every stitch she placed, every drop of blood she wiped away, felt like a race against time. When she finished stitching the leg wound, she turned to Emily. "We need fluids. Can you prep an 4-line?" Emily hesitated, then nodded, her hands steadier now as she followed Sarah's instructions. Together, they worked in silence, the only sounds the soft beeping of the monitors and the cub's labored breathing. Hours passed before Sarah finally stepped back, her arms heavy with fatigue. The cub lay motionless on the table, but its breathing had steadied, its heartbeat stronger than before. Sarah placed a hand on its tiny paw, her chest tight with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Emily slumped into a chair, her face pale. "Do you think it'll make it?" Sarah glanced at the cub, then at the window, where the mother bear's unconscious form was visible in the distance. "It's too soon to tell," she said quietly, "but at least now it has a chance." As the night wore on, Sarah kept vigil beside the cub, her hand resting gently on its side. Every so often, it would twitch or let out a soft whimper, signs that it was fighting to stay alive. The mother bear remained outside, her massive form still under the effects of the sedative. For the first time in years, Sarah felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel, hope. It wasn't just about saving the cub, it was about rediscovering the part of herself that believed in miracles, that saw the beauty in fighting for life no matter how fragile. The stars outside burned brightly, their light filtering through the clinic's windows. Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhaustion tugging at her eyelids, but she refused to leave the cub's side. For the first time that day, the silence felt like a comfort, not a burden. The faint glow of dawn seeped through the clinic's windows, casting long, soft beams across the room. Sarah sat in a chair beside the examination table, her back stiff and her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She had spent the night watching over the cub, its fragile chest rising and falling in a rhythm that felt too slow, too delicate. Every few minutes, she'd lean closer, holding her breath, her fingers brushing lightly against its fur to reassure herself that it was still alive. The night had been a series of careful interventions, fluids administered drop by drop, wounds cleaned and redressed, and quiet, murmured words of encouragement, as though the cub could hear her. At one point, its eyes had fluttered open for just a moment, large, dark, and glassy, but it had quickly slipped back into unconsciousness. That fleeting look, however, had been enough to renew Sarah's resolve. A low, rumbling groan broke the early morning stillness, vibrating through the walls of the clinic. Sarah jolted awake, her body tense. It wasn't the cub this time, it was the mother bear. She moved quickly to the window, peering outside. The bear lay sprawled in the dirt, her massive form stretched out near the edge of the parking lot. Her fur shimmered faintly in the morning light, and for a moment she looked almost peaceful. But then she stirred, her muscles rippling as she struggled to lift her head. "She's waking up," Sarah said as Emily stirred. The bear would soon seek her cub, a reunion Sarah needed to manage carefully. The thought of the bear charging into the clinic, driven by primal instinct, sent a ripple of fear through Sarah, but she also felt a pang of something deeper, sympathy. The mother bear wasn't a threat, she was a parent desperate to protect her child. "We need to stay calm," Sarah finally said, turning to Emily. "I'll go outside when she's fully awake. She needs to know her cub is safe." Emily's eyes widened. "You're going to face her? What if she attacks?" Sarah hesitated. The truth was, she didn't know what the bear would do. But she remembered the way the mother had stood in the parking lot the day before, her golden eyes pleading rather than threatening. That trust had been fragile but real, and Sarah had no intention of breaking it now. "She trusted us once," Sarah said softly. "I have to believe she'll trust us again." Emily looked unconvinced but nodded reluctantly. Together, they spent the next half hour securing the cub's room, locking doors and windows to ensure the mother bear couldn't accidentally wander inside. Sarah left the examination table visible through the large front window, hoping the sight of the cub would calm the bear. The bear was fully awake by the time Sarah stepped outside, the cool morning air biting at her cheeks. The mother bear had risen to her feet, her massive body towering over the parking lot. She swayed slightly, the sedative still lingering in her system, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the area with laser focus. When she saw Sarah, she froze, her golden eyes narrowing and her muscles coiling like a spring. A low growl rumbled from her chest, not aggressive, but filled with warning. Sarah's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She took a single step forward, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Your cub is safe," she said softly. Her voice trembled, but she kept it steady enough to carry across the space between them. "It's inside. I just need you to trust me." The bear didn't move, her growl deepening. Sarah could feel the weight of the animal's gaze, the sheer intensity of its presence. Every instinct screamed at her to back away, to run, but she held her ground. "You brought your cub here for help," Sarah continued, "and I'm helping. But you need to stay calm, or I can't do anything." The bear shifted, her massive paws crunching against the gravel. Her eyes flicked to the clinic window where the cub's small form was visible. For a long, agonizing moment, she stared. Then, slowly, her growls softened, her head lowering slightly as if she understood. Sarah let out a shaky breath, relief flooding her veins. "Good," she murmured. "That's good." She took a step back toward the clinic, her movements deliberate. The bear followed, her strides slow but purposeful. When they reached the door, Sarah hesitated, her hand resting on the frame. "You can't come inside," she said, meeting the bear's gaze, "but I'll make sure you see your cub." The bear let out a low huff, her breath misting in the cold air. Sarah opened the door just enough to slip inside, leaving the mother bear outside. She moved quickly to the examination room, where Emily was waiting nervously. "She's calm for now," Sarah said. "We need to let her see the cub." Emily nodded and stepped aside as Sarah carefully wheeled the examination table closer to the window. The cub remained unconscious but stable, its small body rising and falling with steady breaths. When the mother bear saw her cub through the glass, she let out a sound unlike anything Sarah had ever heard, a deep, guttural rumble that was equal parts relief and longing. Sarah pressed her hand gently against the window. "She's okay," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "You brought her here, and she's going to be okay." The mother bear stayed by the window for hours, her massive form lying in the gravel as she watched over her cub. Sarah checked on her frequently, bringing bowls of water and small scraps of food to ensure she didn't wander off in search of sustenance. Each time Sarah approached, the bear remained calm, her golden eyes softening with what Sarah could only interpret as gratitude. Inside the clinic, the cub began to stir. Its small paws twitched, and its eyes fluttered open for longer intervals. Sarah's heart swelled with each small sign of progress. "You're a fighter," she said softly, stroking its fur. "Just like your mom." By evening, the cub let out its first weak cry, a soft, high-pitched sound that sent the mother bear into a frenzy of movement outside the window. Sarah rushed to calm her, speaking gently through the glass. "She's getting stronger," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You did the right thing bringing her here." That night, as Sarah sat by the fire in the clinic's small break room, she felt something shift inside her. The mother bear's trust, the cub's slow recovery, it was more than just a veterinary challenge. It was a reminder of why she had returned to Maple Creek in the first place. For years, she had doubted her ability to live up to her father's legacy, to make a difference in the lives of the creatures she cared for. But now, for the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Looking out the window where the mother bear lay curled in the shadows, Sarah felt a quiet determination settle over her. She would do everything in her power to save the cub and reunite this extraordinary family. Because some connections, no matter how wild or fleeting, were worth fighting for. The morning air was thick with frost, each breath curling in soft clouds as Sarah stepped outside the clinic. She held a steaming mug of tea in one hand, the warmth seeping into her fingers, and a metal bowl in the other, filled with water for the mother bear. The sight that greeted her brought a faint smile to her lips. The bear was still there, lying just outside the clinic's large front window, her hulking form casting a long shadow on the gravel. She hadn't left all night, her golden eyes keeping a constant vigil over her cub. Sarah set the bowl down a few feet from the bear, her movements slow and deliberate. The bear's head lifted slightly, her gaze flicking to Sarah with cautious interest. They had fallen into a fragile rhythm over the past day, each action calculated, each movement laden with unspoken understanding. "You're a good mother," Sarah said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. She's lucky to have you." The bear let out a low huff, her breath visible in the cold morning air. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't entirely relaxed either, a sound somewhere between a warning and an acknowledgement. Sarah stepped back, giving the bear space, and returned to the clinic. Inside, the clinic was quiet, save for the soft hum of the heaters and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor attached to the cub. Sarah hovered over the examination table, her eyes scanning the small creature's body for any signs of improvement. The wounds on its flank and leg had been carefully cleaned and stitched, the edges now showing the faint pink hue of healing. The cub's breathing, though still shallow, had steadied overnight. Emily stood nearby, nervously wringing her hands. "Do you think she'll make it?" Sarah glanced at her assistant, the weight of the question settling heavily on her shoulders. "She's fighting," she said finally. "That's all we can ask for right now." As if on cue, the cub let out a soft whimper, its tiny body shifting slightly. Sarah's heart jumped at the sound, a flicker of hope blooming in her chest. She placed a gentle hand on the cub's side, feeling the faint tremor of its breaths. "There you are," she murmured. "That's it. Keep going." By mid-morning, Sarah faced her next challenge, feeding the cub. It had been too weak to eat on its own the day before, but now, with its condition marginally improved, Sarah knew it needed sustenance to continue its recovery. She prepared a bottle of formula, warming it carefully before returning to the examination table. The cub stirred as she approached, its small dark eyes fluttering open. It let out another weak cry, the sound both pitiful and determined. Sarah knelt beside the table, holding the bottle near its mouth. "Come on," she coaxed, her voice soft. "You need this." The cub hesitated, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air. Slowly, it latched onto the bottle. Its tiny jaws clumsily gripped the rubber nipple. Sarah held her breath as it began to drink, each small gulp a victory. "That's it," she whispered, her chest tightening with relief. "You're doing so well." Emily watched from the doorway, a smile breaking through her worry. "She's strong." Sarah nodded, her focus entirely on the cub. "She is. Just like her mother." Later that afternoon, Sarah decided it was time to take another step toward earning the mother bear's trust. The cub was stable enough to be moved briefly, and Sarah knew the mother's presence would do more for its recovery than any medicine she could provide. But it was a risk, a gamble that could backfire if the mother bear reacted poorly. She prepared carefully, bundling the cub in a thick blanket to keep it warm. Emily hovered nervously nearby, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "No," Sarah admitted, adjusting the blanket around the cub. "But it's the right thing to do." With the cub cradled in her arms, Sarah stepped outside. The mother bear's head shot up immediately, her body tensing as she took in the sight of her cub. A low, guttural growl rumbled from her chest, and Sarah froze, every muscle in her body screaming at her to retreat. "It's okay," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "She's okay." The bear's growl softened, her eyes locked on the cub. Sarah took a slow step forward, then another, stopping a safe distance from the bear. She knelt carefully, setting the cub down on the blanket and backing away. The mother bear rose to her feet, towering over Sarah as she approached the cub. Every instinct in Sarah's body told her to run, but she stood her ground, her breath shallow as she watched the interaction unfold. The bear sniffed the cub, her nose brushing gently against its fur. Then she let out a low, rumbling sound, a noise Sarah recognized as relief. The cub let out a faint cry, its tiny paws twitching as it nestled closer to its mother's massive form. Sarah felt her chest tighten, tears stinging her eyes. It was a moment of raw, unfiltered emotion, love, relief, and a bond that transcended species. After a few minutes, Sarah stepped forward cautiously, ready to bring the cub back inside. The mother bear watched her, her golden eyes wary but calm. When Sarah gently lifted the cub, the bear didn't growl or move to stop her. Instead, she let out a soft huff, her gaze lingering on Sarah. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was thanking the bear for her trust or something deeper, something she couldn't quite put into words. That night, as Sarah sat by the fire in the clinic's break room, she felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. The cub was improving, the mother bear was beginning to trust her, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was doing more than just surviving, she was making a difference. The sound of the bear's low rumble outside the clinic drifted through the window, a quiet reassurance that Sarah wasn't alone. She closed her eyes, her thoughts drifting to her father's words. "Every creature leaves a story behind. It's our job to listen." For the first time, she felt like she was listening. And it was a story worth fighting for. The first sign that the outside world had taken notice came early the next morning. Sarah was bent over the cub's examination table, carefully replacing the stitches on its flank. The wound, while still raw and tender, was healing steadily, a testament to the cub's resilience. Emily hovered nearby, handing Sarah gauze and antiseptic with practiced precision. The rhythm of their work was interrupted by the sound of tires crunching over gravel outside. Sarah froze, the needle paused mid-stitch. "Who's here this early?" Emily shrugged, peeking out the window. Her face turned pale. "It's Mr. Walker." Sarah frowned. James Walker was the owner of Maple Creek's hardware store and one of the most vocal members of the town council. He had a reputation for sticking his nose where it didn't belong. She set her tools down and wiped her hands on her apron. "Stay with the cub," she said, her tone brisk. "I'll handle him." James Walker arrived at the clinic, his voice sharp with accusations. "You're endangering the whole town, Sarah." Sarah met his glare, her voice firm. "She's not a threat. I'm keeping them safe." James shook his head. "You won't be able to control this forever." His words stayed with her long after he left. Sarah stood on the clinic porch, her arms crossed tightly as she watched his truck disappear down the dirt road. The weight of his concerns pressed heavily on her. She hadn't thought about what might happen if people from outside Maple Creek got involved. Hunters would see the bear as a trophy. Reporters would turn it into a spectacle. Either way, the fragile trust she had built with the mother bear could be destroyed. Emily stepped outside, her face etched with worry. "What do we do now?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "We keep going," she said. "But we'll have to be more careful. No one else can know about this." Emily nodded, though her expression remained uncertain. "Do you think James will tell anyone?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "He might. But we'll deal with that if it happens." Inside, the cub stirred, letting out a soft cry that pulled Sarah's focus back to the moment. She knelt beside the examination table, her hand resting lightly on its side. Its small body was warm under her touch, its breath steady but shallow. "You're not just fighting for yourself," Sarah whispered. "You're fighting for her too." The day passed in a blur of activity. The cub needed constant attention, feedings, wound care, and monitoring its vitals. Sarah barely had time to think, her focus consumed by the tiny life on the table and the immense presence of the mother bear outside. But by mid-afternoon, the cub began to show signs of progress. It lifted its head for the first time, its dark eyes blinking groggily as it took in its surroundings. Sarah felt a swell of relief and pride, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "There you are," she said softly, a smile breaking across her face. "Welcome back." Outside, the mother bear had grown restless. Sarah could hear her low grumbles and the occasional scrape of her claws against the gravel. She checked on her frequently, bringing bowls of water and scraps of food to keep her calm. Each time, the bear's golden eyes followed her every movement, filled with an intensity that Sarah couldn't ignore. "She knows the cub is getting better," Emily observed as they watched the bear from the safety of the clinic window. "Maybe," Sarah replied. "But she won't feel truly safe until they're together again." By the end of the day, Sarah's fears about the town's curiosity proved well-founded. A small group of townsfolk had gathered near the edge of her property, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. Most of them seemed harmless, just locals curious about the rumors. But a few carried hunting rifles slung casually over their shoulders, their presence sending a chill down Sarah's spine. She stepped outside, her posture firm as she addressed them. "This is private property," she said loudly. "I need you all to leave." One of the men with a rifle, a burly logger named Tom, grinned. "We're just here to see the bear, document. No harm in looking." "There is if you scare her," Sarah shot back. "This isn't a zoo. She's a wild animal, and she's injured. You being here puts her and her cub at risk." Tom raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, no need to get worked up." Sarah watched as the group dispersed, her hands clenched into fists. She didn't trust them to stay away for long. That night, as Sarah sat alone in the clinic, the weight of her decision pressed heavily on her. She had taken on more than just the care of an injured animal. She had taken on the responsibility of protecting a family that didn't belong in her world. The mother bear's trust had given her purpose, but it had also placed her at the center of a storm she wasn't sure she could weather. The cub stirred beside her, its tiny paw twitching as it dreamed. Sarah reached out, brushing her fingers lightly over its fur. "You're stronger than you look," she murmured. "Stronger than I feel most days." The sound of the mother bear's low rumble outside the window reminded her that she wasn't alone. For now, that was enough. The following morning dawned gray and overcast, the kind of day where the sun never quite manages to break through the clouds. Sarah woke before her alarm, her body stiff from another restless night in the clinic. The events of the previous day had left her on edge, the faces of the townsfolk lingering in her mind. She couldn't shake the image of Tom and his rifle, nor the quiet murmurs of the crowd as they stood at the edge of her property. As she brewed a pot of coffee in the break room, she stared out the small window overlooking the parking lot. The mother bear was there, as she had been every morning since the cub arrived, her massive body curled protectively near the clinic's front window. Her golden eyes were fixed on the building as though she could see straight through the walls to her cub. There was something calming about the bear's quiet presence, a reminder of the trust that had been forged between them. But that trust felt increasingly fragile with each passing day. The attention from the town was growing, and Sarah knew it was only a matter of time before someone crossed a line. Inside the clinic, the cub stirred on the examination table, its movements more deliberate than the weak twitches Sarah had grown used to. She knelt beside it, her hands steady as she carefully unwrapped the bandages on its flank. The wound was healing well, the angry redness fading to a dull pink, and the stitches were holding. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. "Good morning, little fighter," Sarah murmured, her voice soft as she stroked the cub's fur. The cub let out a faint whimper, its dark eyes fluttering open for the first time. It lifted its head fully, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air. Emily, who had just entered the room, let out a quiet gasp. "She's getting stronger." Sarah nodded, a faint smile breaking through her exhaustion. "She is. She'll be ready to rejoin her mother soon." The thought filled her with equal parts relief and sadness. She had grown attached to the cub in ways she hadn't anticipated. The long hours spent caring for it had forged a bond that felt almost maternal. Letting it go would be difficult, but Sarah knew it was the right thing to do. The cub belonged with its mother, out in the wild where it was meant to be. The sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the quiet of the morning. Sarah's stomach sank as she exchanged a glance with Emily. "Not again," she muttered, rising to her feet. She stepped outside to find a dark green SUV pulling into the lot. The logo on the side, Department of Fish and Wildlife, sent a wave of apprehension through her. Two uniformed officers climbed out, their expressions serious as they approached. "Dr. Thompson," the older officer asked, extending a hand. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard and a badge glinting on his chest. "I'm Officer Harris, and this is Officer Delgado. We've received some reports about a bear on your property." Sarah shook his hand, her grip firm despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "I assume those reports came from James Walker," she said evenly. Harris didn't confirm or deny it. "We're here to assess the situation. A grizzly bear in close proximity to humans is a safety concern for the town and for the bear." "I understand," Sarah said, folding her arms, "but she's not a danger to anyone. She's staying close to her cub, who I've been treating." Delgado, a younger officer with sharp eyes, tilted her head. "You're treating a bear cub? That's not standard veterinary practice." Sarah bristled at the implied criticism but kept her tone calm. "It's not standard for a bear to show up at my clinic with an injured cub, but I wasn't going to let it die." Harris nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I respect what you're doing, Dr. Thompson, but this is a delicate situation. The longer the bear stays here, the greater the risk of conflict. Our job is to ensure everyone's safety, including the bears. We'll need to discuss a plan to relocate them." After the officers left, Sarah sat in the break room, her head in her hands. The idea of relocating the bears filled her with dread. The mother bear's trust had been hard-earned, and moving her now could shatter that fragile bond. Worse, the stress of relocation could jeopardize the cub's recovery. Emily sat across from her, her expression cautious. "Do you think they'll come back?" "They will," Sarah said quietly, "and they won't just leave it up to me next time." "What are you going to do?" Sarah sighed, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her. "I don't know. But I have to find a way to protect them. I owe them that much." The mother bear paced near the window, her growls low and constant. She sensed the tension in the air, as if she knew their time here was running out. Watching her, Sarah felt a deep, urgent need to act. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat by the cub's side, her hand resting lightly on its small body. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. The mother bear's low rumble echoed faintly through the window, a sound that was both comforting and heartbreaking. As she stared at the cub, Sarah thought about her father. She could almost hear his voice, calm and steady, the way it had been during their long hikes through the forest. Every creature leaves a story behind. It's our job to listen. The memory brought tears to her eyes. She had spent so long doubting herself, questioning whether she could live up to her father's legacy. But now, sitting here with this fragile life in her care, she realized that she had already done what he would have wanted. She had listened. And now it was time to act. By morning, Sarah had resolved to return the bears to the wild before anyone intervened. "They came to me for help," she told Emily, "and I'll make sure they're safe." Emily nodded in support. As the sun rose over Maple Creek, Sarah stepped outside, her gaze meeting the mother bears. The trust between them was unspoken but strong, a bond forged in shared resilience and care. "We'll get you home," Sarah whispered. "I promise." The forest was still in the early morning, shrouded in a mist that clung to the trees and muffled every sound. Sarah stood at the edge of the clearing behind her clinic, the cub cradled carefully in her arms. Its tiny body felt heavier now, a testament to its recovery over the past weeks. She could feel its heartbeat, stronger than before, pulsing faintly beneath her fingers. A few feet away, the mother bear stood, her massive form silhouetted against the gray light. She was motionless, ears swiveling as she scanned the forest. The restless pacing from the day before had stopped, replaced by a calm vigilance that only a mother's determination could bring. Sarah glanced at Emily, who was holding a small backpack filled with supplies, just in case. Her assistant's face was pale, her expression a mix of worry and quiet resolve. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, tightening her hold on the cub. "It's time. She knows it, and so do I." Then, a sharp crack broke the silence. The bear growled low, her ears flattening. Sarah spotted a metallic glint in the trees. "Hunters." "Stay calm," she whispered. Her voice trembling, she crouched beside the cub, her body instinctively shielding it. The mother bear moved closer, her massive form a protective barrier between Sarah and the approaching threat. The next moments felt like an eternity. The hunters' voices grew louder, their careless laughter grating against the stillness of the forest. Sarah's mind raced, her thoughts tangled in fear and desperation. If the hunters saw the mother bear, they wouldn't hesitate to shoot, and if the bear sensed danger, she might attack. Sarah turned to Emily, her voice urgent but quiet. "We need to move slowly." Emily nodded, her hands trembling as she adjusted the backpack. Together, they began to edge along the ravine, keeping as low and quiet as possible. The mother bear followed, her steps surprisingly silent for a creature of her size, her eyes never leaving the direction of the hunters, her growls low and constant. When they were far enough away to feel safe, Sarah let out a shaky breath. "We're okay," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The mother bear let out a soft huff, her tension easing slightly. Sarah reached out, brushing her hand against the bear's fur in a gesture of reassurance. "We'll get through this," she murmured. By late afternoon, they reached the glade. It was just as Sarah's father had described, an open expanse surrounded by towering pines, the ground covered in soft moss and dotted with wild flowers. A small stream wound its way through the clearing, its water sparkling in the pale light. The mother bear stepped into the glade first, her nose twitching as she took in the unfamiliar scents. Sarah followed, her heart swelling with relief as she set the cub down gently on the soft ground. The cub let out a weak cry, its tiny legs wobbly as it attempted to stand. The mother bear moved closer, her nose brushing against her cub in a gesture of comfort. Sarah stepped back, giving them space, watching as the mother bear settled beside the stream, her cub nestled against her side. The sight was almost too much to bear, the culmination of weeks of struggle and sacrifice. Emily stood beside her, her voice barely a whisper. "You did it." Sarah shook her head, her eyes never leaving the bears. "We did it." As the sun set, Sarah knelt near the mother bear. "This is your home now. Take care of her," she whispered. The bear met her gaze, a low rumble of gratitude breaking the silence. Sarah's throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes as she rose to her feet. She took one last look at the bears, then turned and began the long walk back to the clinic. Behind her, the glade remained quiet, the bond she had forged with the wild now a memory she would carry with her forever. The walk back to the clinic was slow and quiet, the fading light casting long shadows through the forest. Sarah's footsteps were deliberate, each step feeling heavier than the last. She glanced back once, the glade now hidden by the dense underbrush and towering pines. The memory of the mother bear's golden eyes lingered in her mind, a silent goodbye filled with a depth of understanding that transcended words. Emily walked beside her, equally silent, the tension that had clung to them since the start of the journey beginning to dissolve, replaced by a bittersweet calm. The bears were safe, their bond intact, but the separation felt like a loss Sarah wasn't entirely prepared for. As they reached the edge of the forest, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Sarah paused, tilting her head back to take in the vast expanse above. Her father had loved moments like this, the quiet magic of the wilderness stretching endlessly around them. The clinic felt strangely empty when they arrived, the familiar hum of its machines and the faint scent of antiseptic offering little comfort. Sarah set her bag down and sank into the chair by her desk, her body aching from the strain of the journey. Emily moved quietly around the room, tidying up and locking the doors. "You should get some rest," Emily said gently, breaking the silence. "I will," Sarah replied, though she didn't move. Her gaze had drifted to the examination table where the cub had lain for weeks. The room felt different now, the absence of the tiny life she had fought so hard to save creating an almost tangible void. Emily hesitated, then placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You did something incredible, Sarah. They're alive because of you." Sarah nodded, but her chest tightened. "I didn't do it alone." Emily smiled faintly. "No, but they trusted you. That's not something many people can say." After Emily left for the night, Sarah remained in the clinic, unable to bring herself to leave. She wandered through the rooms, her fingers brushing against the shelves and counters, each one holding a memory of the bear's time there. The heart monitor still blinked faintly on the wall, the four-stand casting a long shadow across the floor. She stopped at the window where the mother bear had kept her vigil. The gravel outside was undisturbed now, the space empty and silent. Yet Sarah could still see her there in her mind's eye, golden eyes glowing softly in the moonlight, her massive form a testament to resilience and trust. Sarah rested her forehead against the cool glass, her breath fogging the surface. "You're safe now," she whispered, as much to herself as to the bears. In the days that followed, the town buzzed with rumors. James Walker, ever the gossip, claimed the bears had been chased off by the wildlife officers, while others speculated that Sarah had orchestrated their disappearance to protect them. Sarah said little, choosing instead to let the story fade into the background. She threw herself back into her work, treating pets and livestock with the meticulous care she always had. But something had shifted within her. Each time she bandaged a paw or checked a heartbeat, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, A reminder of the bond she had shared with the bears and the trust they had placed in her. One afternoon, a young girl brought in an injured rabbit, her small hands trembling as she explained how she had found it near the creek. Sarah knelt beside her, listening patiently before taking the rabbit into her care. As she worked, she thought of her father's words, "Every creature leaves a story behind. It's our job to listen." A month later, Sarah returned to the glade. The journey was quieter this time, the forest filled with the soft rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. When she reached the clearing, her breath caught in her throat. The mother bear was there, her massive form unmistakable against the backdrop of trees. She was standing near the stream, her golden eyes scanning the forest, and beside her, the cub, now stronger and more agile, was playing among the wildflowers, its tiny paws batting at the tall stalks. Sarah stayed hidden, not wanting to disturb them, but as she watched, the mother bear turned her head, her gaze locking onto Sarah's. There was no fear in those eyes, no tension, only recognition. For a brief moment, the connection they had shared was alive again, spanning the distance between them. Then the bear turned away, nudging her cub gently toward the stream. Sarah stayed a while longer, watching as they disappeared into the trees, their silhouettes merging with the forest until they were gone. Back at the clinic, Sarah sat by the fire in her small office, a cup of tea warming her hands. On the desk in front of her was a photo she had taken years ago during one of her father's hikes, a snapshot of a deer grazing in the early morning light. Beside it, she placed a new photo, one she had taken just days before. It was a picture of the cub, taken during one of its stronger moments, its dark eyes staring boldly into the camera. Sarah leaned back, her gaze drifting to the window where the stars were just beginning to appear. The journey with the bears had reminded her of something she had lost, a connection not just to nature but to herself. It had reignited her belief in the importance of compassion, trust, and the quiet power of listening. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. Months later, word spread of a wildlife rehabilitation program opening in Maple Creek, spearheaded by none other than Dr. Sarah Thompson. It became a sanctuary for injured and orphaned animals, a place where they could heal before returning to the wild. The program drew volunteers and experts alike, inspired by Sarah's quiet determination and her remarkable story. And every so often, on quiet evenings, Sarah would walk to the edge of the forest and listen to the sounds of the wilderness. Sometimes, if the wind was just right, she thought she could hear the faint rumble of a bear's call, a reminder of the bond that had changed her life forever. The journey of the mother bear and her cub reminds us that trust, even between the wild and humanity, can lead to extraordinary outcomes. Sarah's determination to help these creatures didn't just save their lives. It rekindled her own sense of purpose and connection to the world around her. If this story touched your heart, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. We share stories that inspire, move, and remind us of the power of compassion and resilience. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.